Warning. The following episode discusses the year 2000 horror film Head Cheerleader, Dead Cheerleader and contains discussion of homophobic contents. A complete list of content warnings can be found in the episode description. Please, proceed with caution. Hello and welcome to the Most Maligned Horror Podcast, a show offering critical analysis and contextualization of the horror films of the early 2000s. I am your host, Macaulay Elijah Quinn. I am a filmmaker and film critic, and on today's episode I'll be discussing with you April 2000's Head Cheerleader, Dead Cheerleader, perhaps the worst post-Scream slasher film that I have ever seen, certainly the worst movie that we've covered so far on this show. Just at the top of this episode, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Scream, the original film from 1996, because we've talked a lot on this show already about the sort of wave of post-Scream slasher films, but I am sort of yet to define what Scream was, what made it so popular. Even in my discussion of Scream 3, I talked a lot more about that film and about its production than I did about the franchise as a whole. Scream, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a horror movie made by people that love horror movies, in particular slasher films. They're poking fun at the genre as insiders, making the kind of jokes that only people from within the horror community sort of broadly could make. And that's one of the things that sort of led to it being so widely accepted, was that as well as being just a solid slasher film on its own, it was very metatextual. It was very reflective on the genre, on the films that had come before it, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th. It was a film that took horror criticism in. It sort of subsumed it, brought it into itself, and then put forward commentary on that criticism. It responded to the criticism of itself within itself, and that was very remarkable at the time. And this inspired a huge number of filmmakers. There was a big resurgence in slasher films post-Scream, which is why I often talk about these post-Scream slashers, and they would try to emulate this same sort of critical reflexiveness within themselves. Head Cheerleader, Dead Cheerleader is ostensibly one of these films. However, it sees the success of Scream and the slasher film revival which sort of came in its wake as being emblematic of a decline in the quality of horror films overall. It sees itself sort of wrongly as being more in conversation with the horror films of the late 60s and early 70s, what a lot of people, including the makers of this film, would consider to be sort of the golden age of like exploitation cinema. And so it sees itself more in conversation with those films, more in conversation with like I Spit on Your Grave and Texas Chainsaw Massacre than it does with its contemporaries. It is a film that is calling for a return to a bygone era where horror films were not expected to express quite so much, either about the genre or about the sort of wider world politically, socially. And this, of course, was a time that never truly existed, but the filmmakers are arguing for it nonetheless. They're arguing for a return. This type of horror fan has, I'm sure, always existed. The kind that either cannot or will not read beyond a surface level, We've spoken about them before in our discussion of American Psycho. Some people simply do not want to think about the art that they encounter. For them, it's just entertainment and nothing more. At the time of recording, actually, there is a lot of talk happening on Twitter about Elon Musk's inability to understand any piece of media which he has consumed. So this is still a discussion that is, constantly happening. Here, I don't want to imply a value judgment on the types of people who watch films purely for entertainment. I don't think that just watching movies for enjoyment is lesser than watching a film to sort of critically analyze or to sort of draw some sort of broader conclusion about the world around you. At the end of the day, if you watch a film just to watch a film, I think that's okay. My issue is with the type of person who would make Head Cheerleader, Dead Cheerleader. The true anti-intellectual who insists that art just has no meaning, or that it should have no meaning in its idealized form. We've spoken before on this show about capitalism's subsuming of the counterculture, about the ways that businesses have adopted countercultural aesthetics as a means of marketing to a younger audience. Recently, I have been listening to the show Trans Panic, a podcast covering extreme cinema, hosted by Alfie Josie Baker and Louise Weird, a filmmaker whose work I really, really love. And on their latest episode, which at the time of recording is episode number 5, I will drop a link to that in the episode description. The two women, they bring up this idea of the apolitical left, which, to hear them talking about it, would be a term that sort of describes the sort of listless counterculture of the 90s and the early aughts.
I hate to always be just bringing the show back to the same theme over and over again, but this idea of history is over. There's no justifiable substitute for capitalism. There's nothing that we can change. And now we are just going to be shocking for shocking's sake, for our own self-indulgence, towards no greater purpose, towards no value. It is counterculture, which is just counterculture without any kind of goal. It's transgression without creation.
The filmmakers responsible for Head Cheerleader are, I believe, staunchly apolitical. At the very least, their art is evocative of this idea of apoliticism. They believe that they are making a parody of Scream, one which points out all the flaws in that film's plot and in its execution, but they have not. What they've actually done is they have remade Scream, but worse and with a much lower budget. This is a problem that a lot of supposed satirical content runs into. It's not enough to simply recreate a scene. You have to actually provide some amount of commentary on the thing for it to be effective satire. In other words, you have to have a take. As a result of their unwillingness to fully engage with a piece of art, because they must put distance between themselves and the work in order to feel above it, the filmmakers end up making a bunch of really obvious observations about Scream, which to anyone who is properly engaged with the text will read as just really, really childish. The most obvious example comes at the end of the film. The climax of the first Scream film is one of the greatest horror movie endings, maybe of all time. So much has already been said about it over the past 27 years that truly, I don't know how much I could add to the conversation, but I think it's fair to say that Stu and Billy's implied homosexuality is one of the most compelling parts of that film's ending. Jeff Miller, the writer and director of this film, it just doesn't seem like he understood that that reading is intended. The reading of Bill and Stu as homosexual lovers. He doesn't seem to believe that that was built into the text. Because their joke, their take on the climax in this film is, did anyone else think that Stu and Billy were acting a little bit gay? And that's just the scene. Stu and Billy's homosexuality is built into the text. It's commented on in Scream 2.
Where's your innovation, huh? Why copycat two high school loser-ass dickheads? Stu was a pussy-ass wet rag. And Billy Loomis, what the fuck? Jesus. What a rat-looking, homo-repressed mama's boy. Why not set your goals higher, huh? You want to be one of the big boys? Huh?
Again, this is what I was talking about in the American Psycho episode of this show. There are people who believe that they are engaging with a work ironically, or that they are, satirizing a piece of work. And they're just not. When we talked about in American Psycho the way that memes of the film are just recreating scenes from the film, whole cloth, with no changes, this is what I was talking about. This is a whole film that's doing that. This is a seriously ropey fucking film. I mean, I expect this kind of thing from video game criticism, but film theory has existed for, 2 centuries at this point. A century and a half, at the very least. There's no excuse for this kind of hack bullshit.
Hey guys, it's Awesome Sauce Boss here, giving you this week's Epic Gamer Fail of the Week.
I'd like to thank Yanka Glonis for the use of her track Slime Dripping Down the Walls off of the album Funtime Party Gal. A link to that album and to their Bandcamp can be found in the episode description. If you have any comments or queries regarding the show and you want to get in touch, you can do that on Twitter at Most Maligned or via email mostmaligned@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd ask that you please consider supporting the show on Patreon, patreon.com/mostmaligned, where for just $5 a month you'll receive exclusive access to Take 2, a semi-weekly show offering critical analysis and contextualization of those films which have not made it onto the main feed. If you head over there right now, you'll find an episode covering Cut, the March 2000 Australian meta-slasher film, which I have been putting off watching because this film has left me with a real sort of post-Scream hangover. As well, if you could please take a moment to leave a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice, I would really appreciate it. Next week on the show, we'll be discussing July 2000's What Lies Beneath, a real dag-core piece of cinema there. But until then, this has been the Most Maligned Horror Podcast.